The unexpected inheritance. Marcus Reed stared at the strange symbol glowing on his wife's wrist, his coffee forgotten on the counter of their small bookstore. The marking had appeared suddenly while Elena was reorganizing the science fiction section, a luminescent pattern that seemed to shift and move like liquid starlight. "Elena," he said carefully, "I think we need to talk about that." His wife of 3 years pulled her sleeve down quickly, but the light still leaked through the fabric of her sweater. Her usual composed demeanor cracked slightly, showing a flash of something ancient and otherworldly in her eyes. "I suppose we do," she said softly. "Though I had hoped to wait until after the bank meeting." The bank meeting. Marcus's stomach clenched at the reminder. Their family bookstore, Reed's, had been struggling for months. Tomorrow they would meet with the bank to discuss the final notice on their loan. 3 generations of carefully curated books, community events, and literary history were about to disappear unless they could pull off a miracle. "Elena, what's going on?" Marcus leaned against the ancient checkout counter, its wood worn smooth by decades of books sliding across its surface. First the strange packages, then the lights in the garden at night, and now this? Elena moved toward him with that peculiar grace she'd always had, the one that made her seem like she was floating rather than walking. He'd always joked that she must have been a dancer in a previous life. Now he wondered if there was more to it. "My love," she began, reaching for his hand. Her skin felt warmer than usual, almost humming with energy. "There's something I need to tell you about my family." The shop's bell chimed, cutting her off. But instead of the usual cheerful tinkle, it rang with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. 3 figures stood in the doorway, their outlines somehow wrong in ways Marcus couldn't quite process. "Princess Elorian," the tallest one said in a voice that sounded like chimes in a storm. "The succession has begun." Marcus turned to his wife, his supposedly normal librarian wife who read romance novels and made terrible puns and couldn't cook to save her life. Princess Elena, or Princess Elorian, straightened to her full height, and suddenly she seemed taller, more regal. The air around her shimmered like heat waves off summer asphalt. "Ambassador KYX, I told the council I would return when I was ready. The matriarch is fading, Your Highness. The succession cannot wait." Marcus felt like he'd stumbled into one of the science fiction novels that lined their shelves. "Elena, what's happening?" She turned to him, and now he could see it clearly, the subtle iridescence of her skin, the too-perfect symmetry of her features, the depth in her eyes that hinted at centuries rather than decades. "I'm not from here, Marcus," she said simply. "My home world, Luminara, is part of the Galactic Alliance. And I was, next in line to lead our trading empire." The room seemed to spin slightly. Marcus gripped the counter harder. "Trading empire?" "The largest in 3 galaxies," Ambassador KYX supplied helpfully. "The House of Elorian controls most of the valuable trade routes and rare resource operations in the known universe." Marcus looked around their cramped bookstore with its leaking roof and outdated heating system, then back at his wife. "And you've been working as a librarian? Living in a tiny apartment above a failing bookstore?" Elena's smile was both sad and amused. "I wanted to understand this world properly. To live as humans do. And then I met you, and none of the wealth or power seemed to matter anymore. The matriarch gave you 3 Earth years to explore," Ambassador KYX interjected. "But now time grows short. The succession ritual must be completed within 1 lunar cycle, or your claim to leadership will be forfeit." Marcus's mind raced through every strange moment over the past 3 years that suddenly made sense: Elena's confusion over simple technology but instant mastery of complex systems, her occasional slips into languages that shouldn't exist, the way plants seemed to grow better when she was near them. "The bank meeting tomorrow," he said slowly. "Were you going to tell me then?" Elena nodded. "I had planned to reveal everything, to show you how we could save the bookstore. But events have forced my hand." She turned to the ambassadors. I will need time to explain everything to my husband. Time is a luxury we do not have, Your Highness. The opposition grows stronger daily. There are those who would prefer the House of Elorian fall, allowing them to seize control of the trade routes. A small crease appeared between Elena's brows, the same one she got when shelving books in the wrong order. Then we will make time. She waved her hand, and suddenly the air itself seemed to thicken. The ambassadors froze in place, their forms becoming translucent. A temporal bubble, Elena explained at Marcus's startled look. We have about 6 hours while only seconds pass out there. Enough time for me to explain everything. Marcus sank into his favorite reading chair, the leather worn and cracked but still comfortable. Start with the beginning. Elena perched on the arm of his chair, her hand finding his. It began 300 years ago, by Earth reckoning, when my family discovered the secret of sustainable quantum tunneling. Through the bookstore window, the sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, as if the universe itself was acknowledging that nothing would ever be the same again. Worlds apart. The quantum transport chamber hummed with an energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. He stood beside Elena, still strange to think of her as Princess Elorian, as the crystalline walls pulsed with patterns of light that seemed to follow some alien mathematics. Are you sure about this? He asked, adjusting the collar of his newly synthesized travel suit. The material felt like liquid silk but supposedly could withstand the vacuum of space. Elena squeezed his hand. The High Council won't recognize my claim unless they meet my consort. And... She hesitated, I want you to see where I come from. To understand. The past 24 hours had been a blur. After Elena's explanation, they'd dealt with the bank through an anonymous investor, who had purchased the building outright. Reed's was safe, though Marcus suspected it would become something very different in the coming months. Ambassador KYX approached, their crystalline form shimmering. The portal is aligned, Your Highness. Luminara awaits. Marcus took a deep breath. Just remember, you promised no tentacles or extra heads would suddenly appear. Elena's laugh chimed like stellar bells. My people chose these forms millennia ago. We find them quite efficient. Her expression softened. Though you should prepare yourself. Luminara is different. Different how? Marcus's question dissolved into pure sensation as the transport activated. For a moment that felt like eternity, he existed as pure light, consciousness stretched across vast distances. Then reality snapped back into focus, and he found himself struggling to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. They stood in a vast chamber that seemed to be made of living crystal, its walls shifting and flowing like liquid glass. But it was what lay beyond the transparent sections that took his breath away. A city sprawled in all directions, defying gravity and conventional architecture. Buildings of impossible geometries floated in mid-air, connected by bridges of pure light. Gardens grew upside down, their crystalline flowers chiming in harmonic resonance. Multiple suns of different colors painted everything in an ever-changing rainbow. Welcome to the capital, Elena said softly. My home. Before Marcus could form words, a delegation approached. Unlike Ambassador KYX's simple form, these beings wore their crystalline bodies like royal regalia, faceted and elaborate. Their leader, a towering figure whose form sparkled with what looked like captured starlight, spoke in a voice that seemed to bypass Marcus's ears and materialize directly in his mind. So, this is the human who would be consort to the House of Elorian. Elena's grip on Marcus's hand tightened. High Chancellor, I present Marcus Reed, my chosen partner and heir to the Earth diplomatic seat. The High Chancellor circled them slowly. A bookseller. From a primitive world that hasn't even achieved basic interstellar travel. The disdain in their voice could have frozen nitrogen. Marcus felt a familiar spark of defiance, the same one that had kept him fighting for his bookstore against all odds. We may not have interstellar travel, he said, surprised at how steady his voice was, but we've created works of imagination that span universes. Every book in my store contains a world as complex and beautiful as this one. A murmur rippled through the assembled council members. The High Chancellor's form flickered with what might have been surprise. Pretty words, a new voice cut in. A smaller figure emerged from the crowd, their crystalline form tinted with deep purple hues. But the House of Elorian needs more than poetry to maintain its trade empire. Cousin Vex, Elena's voice carried a warning edge. I didn't expect you to be here. Did you think I would miss my dear cousin's return? And with such an interesting choice of consort. Vex moved closer, their form refracting light in ways that made Marcus's eyes hurt. Though I wonder if the council realizes just how much time you've spent playing shopkeeper on that backward planet. 3 years is a long time to abandon one's responsibilities. I wasn't playing anything, Elena's voice had taken on that steel edge Marcus recognized from when she dealt with difficult customers. I was learning. Something you might consider, Vex. Earth may be young, but they understand things we've forgotten. Innovation. Adaptation. Change. The High Chancellor raised a limb, silencing the growing murmurs. This debate can wait. For now, the succession protocols must begin. Princess Elorian, you and your consort will be escorted to the preparation chambers. The trials begin at first moonrise. As they followed their escort through corridors that seemed to sing with every step, Marcus leaned close to Elena. Trials. Traditional tests to prove a successor's worth, she whispered back. Knowledge, wisdom, strength of will. Nothing too dangerous. Why do I feel there's a usually missing from that sentence? Elena's hesitation wasn't reassuring. Vex's presence complicates things. They've always wanted the throne, and they're not above manipulation. We'll need to be careful. They were led to a suite that would have made Earth's most luxurious hotels look like storage closets. The walls shifted colors with their moods, and what looked like stars floated freely in the air, providing soft light. The trials begin in 6 hours, their escort announced. Rest. Prepare. The future of the House of Elorian depends on your success. With that cheerful thought, they left. Marcus sank onto what he hoped was a bed, it adjusted its shape to cradle him perfectly, so probably. When you said your family had money, I was thinking maybe old-world aristocracy or tech billionaire. Not. He gestured at the window where a ship that looked like a crystal whale floated past, this. Elena sat beside him, her form starting to shimmer as she relaxed her human appearance slightly. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That you loved me for me. Not for what I could give you. She waved her hand, and a holographic display appeared, showing strings of numbers that made Marcus's head spin. The House of Elorian doesn't just control trade routes. We have the power to shape economies, influence the development of entire species. That kind of power attracts people who only want to use it. Marcus pulled her close, noticing how her skin now had a subtle luminescence. Elena, I fell in love with the woman who could spend hours discussing classic literature with customers, who burns every meal she tries to cook, who cries at cat videos. The space princess thing? That's just extra. She laughed, and tiny lights danced in the air around them. The High Council might disagree. Then we'll prove them wrong. He looked out at the alien city, beautiful and terrifying in its strangeness. Though I might need a crash course in intergalactic politics first. Elena's expression turned serious. We don't have much time. The trials ahead, they're designed to test more than just the successor. They'll test us both, our bond, our commitment to each other and to the House of Elorian. Then let's get studying. Marcus straightened his shoulders. After all, I do run a bookstore. Learning new things is kind of my specialty. As Elena began explaining the complex political landscape they would need to navigate, Marcus couldn't help but think that all those science fiction books he'd spent his life reading might finally come in handy. He just hoped they'd prepared him enough for what lay ahead. The hidden threat. The first sun was rising over Luminara's crystalline spires when Marcus discovered he could read minds, or rather, that someone had given him the ability without his knowledge. The revelation came during breakfast when he suddenly heard the server's thoughts about how oddly primitive the human consort looked while trying to eat floating nutrition spheres. "Elena," he said carefully, setting down what he hoped was a fork, "why can I hear what everyone's thinking?" His wife looked up from her datapad, where she'd been reviewing protocols for the first trial. Her form shimmed slightly with what he'd learned was amusement. "Oh, that. It's a traditional gift from the matriarch, temporary telepathic enhancement for all potential successors and their consorts. It helps prevent deception during the trials. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? I thought you'd sleep through the activation phase." She reached across the table to touch his hand. "Most species do. Your human consciousness is remarkably resilient." Marcus was about to respond and a new thought cut through his mind like a laser beam: the human will never survive the maze of truths. Such a pity. The House of Elorian might need new leadership. He turned to see Cousin Vex gliding past their table, their crystalline form refracting the morning light into painful prisms. The threat in their projected thoughts was unmistakable. "Ignore them," Elena whispered. "Vex has always used intimidation as a weapon. Focus on preparing for the first trial." But as they made their way to the trial chambers, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The temporary telepathy was revealing more than just surface thoughts. He was picking up undercurrents of tension, fragments of conversations about maintaining purity and protecting the old ways. The trial chamber itself was a marvel of alien architecture, a vast dome that seemed to be made of living light. The High Council members arranged themselves in floating tiers above the central platform where Elena and Marcus stood. The High Chancellor's voice resonated through the chamber. "The first trial tests the successor's connection to our history and traditions. Princess Elorian and her consort will enter the maze of truths. They must reach the center together, facing their deepest fears and truths along the way. Any deception, any attempt to hide one's true nature, will result in immediate disqualification." Marcus felt Elena's hand tighten in his. "Together," she whispered. The floor beneath them became transparent, revealing a labyrinth that seemed to be constructed from pure starlight and shadow. As they descended into it, Marcus heard Vex's thoughts one last time: "Everything is proceeding as planned." The maze shifted around them, responding to their presence. Each turn brought new challenges, memories made manifest, fears given form. Marcus watched Elena confront her guilt over leaving her responsibilities, saw her face down projections of disappointed ancestors and angry council members. His own trials were equally revealing. The maze pulled from his deepest insecurities, the fear of not being enough, of letting down his family's legacy, of being a simple human in a realm of beings who could reshape reality with a thought. But something wasn't right. The challenges were becoming increasingly specific, unnaturally focused on highlighting the differences between them. Marcus's human limitations were emphasized again and again, while Elena was confronted with scenarios that painted Earth and humanity as primitive, dangerous. "This isn't normal, is it?" he asked as they paused at another junction, the walls around them pulsing with uncomfortable truths. Elena's form had begun to flicker with concern. "No. The maze should test our bond, not try to break it. Someone has tampered with." A sudden shift in the maze's architecture cut her off. The walls became mirrors, each reflecting a different version of their possible future. In one, Elena ruled alone, having abandoned her primitive consort. In another, Marcus was consumed by the power of the House of Elorian, corrupted by abilities he couldn't control. "Choose," the maze seemed to whisper. "You cannot have both worlds." Through his newfound telepathy, Marcus picked up fragments of a conversation happening far above them. "The alterations are complete. They'll never reach the center together. The House of Elorian will remain pure." Elena must have heard it too. Her form crystallized fully, dropping all pretense of humanity. Marcus, the maze has been sabotaged. Vex and their supporters, they're trying to force us to separate. Marcus looked at the mirrors again, understanding dawning. They think if they can prove we're too different, that I'm too human. They can invalidate my claim to succession. Elena's light dimmed with worry. Maybe they're right. I'm asking too much of you, expecting you to leave your world behind. Stop. Marcus turned to face her, reaching out to touch her crystalline form despite the energy that crackled against his skin. Remember what I told you about books? About how they contain entire worlds. Well, you're my favorite story, Elena. The most amazing, unexpected chapter in my life. And I don't care if you're made of crystal or light or stardust. As he spoke, something strange began to happen. The mirrors around them started to crack, but instead of breaking, they merged, showing new reflections. Images of possibilities that hadn't been programmed, Elena and Marcus transforming the bookstore into a bridge between worlds, Earth becoming a new kind of trading hub, their differences becoming strengths rather than weaknesses. The maze's attempts to force them apart had revealed a fundamental truth: their bond wasn't defined by their species or origins, but by their ability to imagine new possibilities together. Elena's form blazed with sudden understanding. The maze doesn't just test truth, it reveals it. And the truth is, we're stronger because we're different, Marcus finished. He could feel it now, their minds connecting through the telepathic enhancement, showing them a path forward. We don't have to choose between worlds. The maze walls shuddered, and a new path appeared, leading straight to the center. As they stepped forward together, Marcus caught one last fragment of thought from above, this time tinged with panic. Impossible. The programming should have. But whatever should have happened didn't matter. They reached the central chamber hand in hand, human and crystalline being, their combined presence triggering the completion sequence. The maze dissolved around them, returning them to the trial chamber where the High Council waited. The High Chancellor's form rippled with what might have been approval. The first trial is complete. The successors have proven their bond genuine and their truth unshakable. In the upper tiers, Cousin Vex's form had darkened to an angry purple. But before they could speak, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Emergency signals flashed in colors Marcus's human eyes could barely process. Your Excellency. A guard materialized in the chamber. We've detected unauthorized access to the succession protocols. Someone has been tampering with the sacred trials. The chamber erupted in chaos. Through his telepathic link, Marcus caught fragments of panic, accusations, and beneath it all, a current of darker thoughts fleeing the chamber. Elena's grip on his hand tightened. The real trial, she whispered, is just beginning. Rising to power. Chaos erupted in the trial chamber as security forces materialized in bursts of crystalline light. Through the telepathic enhancement, Marcus could feel the panic and outrage rippling through the assembled council members. But beneath the chaos, he sensed something else, a thread of satisfaction, of plans falling into place. Elena must have felt it too. Her form shifted, taking on a more commanding presence. Seal the chamber, she ordered, her voice carrying the weight of generations of authority. No one leaves until we uncover the truth. The High Chancellor's form pulsed with approval. Guards, do as the princess commands. But as crystalline barriers materialized over every exit, Marcus noticed something odd. Cousin Vex wasn't trying to flee. Instead, they stood calmly in their raised position, their form radiating what felt suspiciously like triumph. My dear cousin, Vex's voice carried across the chamber, always so quick to take command. But perhaps we should review the succession laws regarding unauthorized human influence in sacred trials. A murmur ran through the council. Marcus felt Elena's alarm through their connection. What are you talking about? Vex's form shimmered as they produced a series of holographic documents. According to these records, your human consort accessed restricted areas of the maze's control systems shortly before the trial began. Quite impressive for a primitive species, wouldn't you say? That's impossible, Marcus started, but Vex continued smoothly. The evidence has already been verified by 3 independent systems. The human tampered with our sacred trials, invalidating the succession attempt. Vex turned to address the council. The House of Elorian cannot be led by one who would allow such corruption. The chamber erupted in angry debate. Marcus felt Elena's form temperature drop several degrees beside him. This was your plan all along, she said. Frame Marcus for your own tampering, knowing the council's prejudices would do the rest. You have no proof, Vex responded smugly. Actually, Marcus spoke up, an idea forming, we might. He turned to address the council. You all gave me temporary telepathic abilities, right? To prevent deception during the trials. The High Chancellor nodded slowly. It is tradition. Then you also know that humans have no natural psychic defenses. I can't block or filter anything I receive. Marcus stepped forward, letting his mind open fully to the telepathic field surrounding them. Every thought, every plan, every secret intention, I've been receiving them all. Including the real sequence of events that led to the maze's tampering. Vex's form darkened. You're bluffing. No species can process that much telepathic information without training. Want to bet? Marcus smiled, thinking of every complex plot he'd ever kept straight while reading a fantasy novel. Let me tell you about the conversations I overheard in the service corridors last night. The ones about accessing the maze's ancient programming through the maintenance systems. The ones that included your voice, Cousin Vex. He felt Elena's surprise and pride through their link as he continued. Or should I mention the thoughts I picked up about the failsafe program? The one designed to trigger if I actually manage to prove the tampering? The one that's about to. A violent tremor shook the chamber. Warning signals flashed as ancient machinery beneath them roared to life. Do that, Marcus finished. Vex's form had gone almost black with rage. If I cannot have the succession, no one will. The chamber's purification sequence has begun. In moments, all organic matter will be converted to pure energy. Including your precious human consort. Guards moved to apprehend Vex, but they were already shifting, their form becoming something ancient and terrible. The House of Elorian must remain pure. Energy crackled through the chamber as ancient defense systems activated. Marcus felt the air becoming charged, dangerous to his human form. But instead of fear, he felt strangely calm. All those hours reading sci-fi novels in his bookstore had taught him something important. There was always a solution if you were willing to think differently enough. Elena, he called out, remember what you said about the House of Elorian controlling trade routes? She turned to him, her form blazing with protective energy as she tried to shield him from the growing danger. This isn't the time for a business discussion. But it is. You told me the house became powerful because it could connect different worlds, different species. It wasn't about purity, it was about adaptation. About finding new ways for different cultures to work together. Understanding blazed through their telepathic connection. Elena's form began to change, not becoming more crystalline like Vex, but something new. Something that bridged both their natures. The succession isn't about maintaining the old ways, she announced, her voice carrying power and certainty. It's about finding new ones. She reached for Marcus, and as their hands connected, something extraordinary happened. The telepathic enhancement that had been forced on him merged with Elena's crystalline energy, creating a feedback loop of power and possibility. Through their combined consciousness, they could see the chamber's ancient systems, understand their underlying patterns. The purification sequence, Marcus realized, it's not about destroying organic matter. It's about transformation. Working together, they reached into the chamber's controls. Where Vex had tried to force the ancient systems to reject change, Marcus and Elena showed them a new path. The energy meant to destroy instead began to reshape the chamber itself, creating a space where all forms of life could exist together. Vex's power, built on fear and rejection, couldn't stand against their united strength. Their dark form began to crack, revealing the fear at its core, fear of change, of losing control, of becoming irrelevant in a changing universe. The High Chancellor's voice cut through the chaos. The succession trial is complete. The true heir has been revealed, not through rejection of change, but through mastery of it. As the chamber's energy subsided, Marcus found himself standing in a transformed space. The rigid crystalline architecture had become something organic and flowing, a perfect blend of human and Luminoran aesthetics. Around them, council members were emerging from protective shields, their forms showing hints of new possibilities. "Well," he said to Elena, whose form now flickered between human and crystalline with fluid grace, "I guess this means we'll have to renovate the bookstore." Her laugh chimed through the chamber, setting new crystals growing in delicate patterns. "I was thinking more of an expansion. Earth could use a good intergalactic library." The High Chancellor approached, their forms showing clear signs of the chamber's transformation. "The House of Elorian has chosen its path. The question is, are you both ready to lead it?" Marcus looked at Elena, feeling the strength of their connection, the possibilities it represented. Through their link, he could sense her excitement about their future, her love for both her worlds, and her absolute certainty that together they could face whatever came next. "Actually," he said, "I have some ideas about that. How do you feel about starting an intergalactic book club? Two worlds united." 1 year after the succession trials, Reed's had changed almost as much as its owners. The Victorian-era building still stood on its quiet corner of Main Street, but now crystalline additions stretched up into impossibly elegant spires that somehow didn't attract attention from passers-by. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. Marcus sat at what used to be the checkout counter, now a sweeping desk of marble and living crystal, helping a young Andromedan navigate Earth's classical literature section. The alien's tentacles carefully turned the pages of Pride and Prejudice while their translation crystal rendered Austen's words into harmonic light patterns. "The social dynamics are fascinating," the Andromedan hummed. "Though I'm curious why they didn't simply use telepathic bonds to avoid the misunderstandings." "That's actually part of the point," Marcus explained, remembering his own crash course in interspecies literary appreciation. "The limitations of human communication create the tension that drives the story." A familiar chime of laughter drew his attention. Elena stood in the newly created Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Wing, her form shifting subtly between human and crystalline as she led a group of Earth literature professors through an exhibition of Luminoran poetry crystals. The academics' faces showed that perfect mix of wonder and scholarly excitement that Marcus had come to love. "And this is why we believe Shakespeare would have particularly appreciated the crystalline sonnet form," Elena was saying. "The way meaning changes based on which angle you view it from creates layers of interpretation that." She broke off as emergency lights pulsed through the store's crystalline structures. Marcus was already moving, years of running a bookstore having taught him to recognize trouble brewing. A crowd had gathered in the quantum physics section, where a young human was facing off with a being of pure energy contained in a protective field. "What do you mean these equations are childishly simplistic?" the human demanded, wielding a physics textbook like a weapon. "This is cutting-edge theoretical work." The energy being flickered in what Marcus had learned was amusement. Perhaps on Earth. But really, attempting to understand quantum mechanics without accounting for the 7th through 11th dimensions? It's like trying to read with your eyes closed. Marcus stepped between them, projecting calm through the store's ambient telepathic field. "Dr. Chen, remember what we discussed about perspective in last week's Physics and Philosophy book club? And ZX still, not everyone has evolved beyond the need for spacetime constraints." Both parties subsided, though the physics textbook still smoked slightly. Crisis averted, Marcus made his way to where Elena was finishing her tour. She smiled as he approached, her form shimming with affection. "Another quantum physics dispute?" she asked. You'd think after a year of being an intergalactic library, I'd be used to it. He glanced around their transformed store. What had once been struggling to stay open was now a nexus point between worlds. Beings from across the galaxy came to explore Earth's literature, while humans could access the collected knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. The House of Elorian had found a new kind of trade, the exchange of stories, ideas, and understanding. Elena's form shifted fully human as she took his hand. The High Council is arriving in an hour. Are you ready for the quarterly review? As ready as I'll ever be. He squeezed her hand. Though I still think we should show them the children's section last. Nothing demonstrates successful cultural exchange like watching a Jovian gas cloud enjoy where the wild things are. Their moment was interrupted by a soft cough. They turned to find Ambassador KYX, looking somewhat more relaxed than during their first meeting, though their crystalline form still managed to convey a sense of urgency. Your Highnesses, there's a situation requiring your attention. It seems Cousin Vex has completed their rehabilitation program. After their attempted coup, Vex had been sentenced to study Earth literature, specifically works about change, growth, and accepting differences. It had been Marcus's idea, much to the High Council's skepticism. And? Elena prompted. They've submitted a formal request to open a poetry exchange program between Earth and the Outer Rim worlds. KYX's form flickered with what might have been amazement. Something about finding unexpected beauty in human verse forms. Marcus and Elena shared a knowing look. See, he said. I told you Dead Poets Society would get through to them. A commotion near the front door drew their attention. A class of elementary school students was arriving for their weekly story time, led by their teacher who had long since stopped questioning why some of the books floated or why certain stories created actual holograms when read aloud. Story time with the Earth children, Elena said, her form brightening. We shouldn't keep them waiting. As they moved to greet the children, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. The House of Elorian was still the most powerful trading empire in 3 galaxies, but now it traded in something far more valuable than goods or resources. Every story shared, every idea exchanged, every moment of understanding between different species strengthened the connections between worlds. The children settled onto reading cushions that adjusted to each individual's comfort needs, while various alien beings drifted closer to observe the Earth tradition of story time. Elena picked up a book, a real, paper book, because some experiences couldn't be replicated in crystal or energy, and began to read. Once upon a time. She started, her voice carrying the harmonics of her true form while maintaining human warmth. Marcus watched as human children and alien beings alike leaned forward, caught in the timeless magic of a story well told. Above them, the store's crystalline architecture hummed in resonance with Elena's words, creating subtle light patterns that enhanced but didn't overshadow the traditional reading experience. This was their real success, he realized. Not the political victory over Vex, not the transformation of the House of Elorian, but this, creating spaces where different worlds could meet, learn, and grow together. Their bookstore had become more than just a business or even a library. It was proof that love really could bridge the gap between stars. Elena paused in her reading to smile at him, her form flickering briefly to show her true self before settling back into human appearance. Through their now permanent telepathic bond, he felt her complete agreement with his thoughts. Ready for the next chapter, she asked, speaking to both the children and him. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the chapters yet to come in their own ongoing story. Always. Above them, Earth's sun and the crystalline lights of Luminara created patterns of impossible beauty, while somewhere in the physics section, a human and an energy being were quietly discovering they might both be right about quantum mechanics. Just another day at the most unusual bookstore in the galaxy, or any other.